Why aren't we sending people to the moon? Journeying to the moon is undoubtedly one of the greatest and most challenging ventures in human history, and this challenging journey was successfully accomplished for the first time in 1969. But why was it done, and why haven't we gone back for 52 years? The initiation of manned missions to the moon in 1969 and the sudden halt of these missions in 1972 remain a mystery to many people to this day. Even during the early stages of technological development, the successful execution of these missions raises questions. So, what happened in the past 50 years that these missions are no longer conducted? While this uncertainty might lead some to entertain conspiracy theories like we never actually went to the moon, the reality is quite different. To understand the reasons behind these missions, let us take a brief look at the Cold War period between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War, which began in 1947 between the United States and the Soviet Union, brought about the space race. The race officially started on October 4, 1957, when the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik 1 satellite into space. The competition intensified further on April 12, 1961, when the Soviet Union sent Yuri Gagarin into space. These events led to President John F. Kennedy's pledge on May 25, 1961, to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth within a decade. When July 16, 1969, arrived, the Apollo 11 spacecraft, carrying Commander Neil Armstrong and two other crew members, was launched from Kennedy Space Center to the moon aboard the Saturn V rocket. Approximately 5 days after the launch, at 6:17, pilot Neil Armstrong successfully became the first human to set foot on the moon. This achievement, which resonated worldwide, was made even more significant by his words that as one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Following this first manned lunar mission, America succeeded in landing 12 people on the moon through 5 additional missions. During these journeys, astronauts collected lunar samples, conducted experiments, and took photographs before returning. However, the lunar program concluded with the Apollo 17 mission on December 7, 1972. The Apollo-Soyuz test project treaty between the two superpowers in 1970 to mark the beginning of a period of detente. This treaty paved the way for further cooperation, notably with American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts conducting joint missions in Earth orbit in 1975. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the United States and the Russian Federation agreed on the International Space Station project in 1993, officially ending the space race. Even though joint projects began with the end of the Cold War rivalry, the fascination with the moon never completely faded away. Indeed, as explained, the primary reason for traveling to the moon was the competition between the two superpowers. The Soviet Union's demonstration of launching spacecraft into space, which proved its ability to send intercontinental missiles, and its technological advancement, prompted the United States to initiate manned lunar landings. It was a project to demonstrate that America was not falling behind in the race. Several factors contributed to the cessation of manned lunar landing programs. Firstly, the Apollo program and the manned lunar landing missions were highly costly endeavors. Resources required for these missions began to be diverted to other areas, making it difficult to sustain the program. Secondly, despite the successes of the Apollo missions, the scientific and exploratory purposes of manned lunar landings were not among the top priorities. The primary objective of the missions emerged as a part of political and military competition. Public interest and support in America waned over time. While the moon missions initially generated great excitement, public support dwindled over time, affecting the motivation of politicians and leaders to finance the program. If you ever want to hop on the moon one day, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. So, as you can see, there have been multiple reasons why we haven't returned to the moon since 1972, but the most significant one is money. The cost for the 5 moon landings between 1960 and 1973 amounted to $28 billion for the United States. Adjusted for inflation, this is equivalent to $364 billion today. Yes, you read that right, $364 billion. The total cost of NASA and the Apollo program for the first moon landing was $50 billion. Adjusted for today, This is 641 billion. To delve into some of these expenditures, 7 billion was spent on the Saturn V rocket, 4 billion on the command and service modules, and 2 billion on the lunar module. But it didn't stop there. The salaries of astronauts who went to the moon, along with thousands of engineers, scientists, and other workers, amounted to 5 billion. To put it into perspective, 6 out of every $10 owned by an American citizen was spent on the moon landing project. According to a report by NASA in 2005, the cost of a trip to the moon was estimated at 104 billion. Adjusted for today, this amounts to 170 billion. As mentioned earlier, this figure is well above NASA's current annual budget of 24 billion. I guess now you understand the real reason why these trips haven't happened. However, during President Bush's term, NASA was tasked with finding a way to return to the moon and to replace the retiring space shuttle. For this purpose, NASA created the Constellation program and developed the Mars rocket and the Orion spacecraft to land astronauts on the moon. A total of 9 billion was spent on the design, construction, and testing stages of this major project. However, during President Barack Obama's term, NASA's mission was cancelled due to the inability to estimate the cost of the Constellation program. During his presidency, Trump aimed to carry out manned lunar missions again. If he had been re-elected for a second term, another journey would have been made in 2023, towards the end of his second term. Today, investment in NASA continues. NASA's budget, which was initially 5 billion in 2019, has been increased to 24 billion. With this increase, projects such as the James Webb Space Telescope, the construction of new launch systems, unmanned missions to Jupiter, Mars rovers, various probes to the asteroid belt, exploration vehicles to the Kuiper belt, and a probe approaching the Sun have been initiated. In the future, the first stop for colonizing Mars will be the moon. In these days of space tourism, the next target will be lunar tourism. In this direction, launch stations, fuel depots for deep space missions, space telescopes, and space bases will be established. Even retired astronaut Chris Hadfield said in an interview, a permanent human research station on the moon is the next logical step. It's only 3 days away. We can afford to get it wrong and not kill everybody. As you can see, even though we haven't been to the moon for 52 years, we haven't given up. However, the American public is divided on this issue. Only 55% of Americans support NASA's moon program. And of course, these are not the only problems. There are technical challenges and risks to human life associated with this mission. Craters and rocks on the lunar surface can pose deadly risks during landing. But that's not all. The layer of dust on the moon's surface is a sticky and highly abrasive substance that damages astronauts' suits and spacecraft. Astronaut Peggy Whitson has said, if we are going to spend long durations and build permanent habitats, we have to figure out how to handle that. Another problem is solar radiation. The moon lacks a protective atmosphere, so it is very hot due to direct exposure to sunlight for about 15 days. It then becomes very cold for the next 15 days in darkness. We must not forget the radiation issue. In fact, the radiation exposure during these short missions wasn't much of a problem. This is evident from the moon visits between 1960 and 1970. Astronauts carried dosimeters for measurements during the journey, but since these devices evaluated the entire travel process, precise information about radiation on the lunar surface couldn't be obtained. However, with NASA's Artemis program and the plans for manned missions by the China National Space Administration, research into lunar radiation and similar issues has resumed. As a result, the robotic Chang'e 4 conducted various measurements by landing in the von Karman crater. It was discovered that the radiation to which astronauts would be exposed is approximately 200 times higher than that on Earth. Additionally, it was learned that the daily radiation exposure is 369 microsieverts. This is 6 times higher than the dose received by the crew of the International Space Station. However, researchers have noted that if bases on the moon are covered with at least 50 cm of lunar soil, humans could be protected. If they can successfully shield a room with 10 meters of water, they could protect against solar storms, which raise radiation levels. Despite all these challenges, interest in space exploration has never completely vanished. In recent years, especially with the increasing interest of the private sector in space, discussions about sending humans back to the moon and even to Mars have reignited. However, this time, projects led by private companies and international collaborations have become more prominent than government-supported programs. In conclusion, the cessation of manned lunar landing programs was a result of a complex set of factors. However, our desire for space exploration and humanity's progress in space remains alive. If one day we can find financial support again, if we can figure out how to easily overcome the dangers on the moon, and if we can manage not to die from lunar radiation, then we can start colonizing the moon and use it as a stepping stone to reach other planets. That's the moon mission in a nutshell.